I'm embarrassed to associate myself with anything as grand as another theory of everything. But I do it to buck a trend. Most theories of everything are celebrations of physicalism. They're really polemical arguments for physicalism. They don't pretend to account for everything. They ostentatiously omit the mental. They leave all that unaccounted for. Okay, Sean Carroll in The Big Picture did include what he called poetic naturalism, but that turned out to be just another gloss on the familiar deterministic physics. I linked to a review of that book in the comments. My contribution to the tally of theories of everything is dualist. Because it draws heavily on ideas about evolution, I call it Evo-dualism. It can't account for everything, like how mind and matter interact. I offer it mainly to suggest that such a thing as a dualist theory of everything is possible. Here's my theory. First, what do I mean by dualism? In my version, reality comes in two different forms: purely physical matter and aspects of mind. Briefly, matter and mind. Matter and mind operate using entirely different kinds of processes, matter employing physical processes that act deterministically, mind employing various non-physical mental processes. But in my version of dualism, because matter and mind share the same substrate, they're free to interact in both directions. I think this issue of interaction is where dualists and physicalists most crucially disagree. I think both dualists and physicalists accept that matter can interact with mind. A physical blow can make us feel pain. Where they differ is physicalists believe interaction can't go the other way. Because it isn't physical, mind can't make anything physical happen, like tell our bodies what to do. Only what's physical about us, our bodies and brains, can do that. Any impression we have that we can consciously tell our bodies what to do, for physicalists, can only be an illusion. Why do we disagree? I've concluded it's because we just experience the world differently. A survey I'm running on how we experience reality, link in the comments, suggests it depends on what we experience consciously in between sensing something and doing something about it. In between, dualists experience an entire conscious thinking process that leads from the one to the other, ending in a conscious decision-making process. And it's that conscious decision that tells the body what to do. Physicalists seem to not experience such a thinking process. They experience only the initial sensing of something and their body responding to it, by talking or moving, for example. For them, their decisions are made for them outside of consciousness in a purely physical brain. And it's that brain that makes them respond, not conscious thinking. The whole process could easily be purely physical. And if that's so, if our difference is due simply to differences in how we're conscious, then it isn't something we need argue about. So I'm addressing primarily fellow dualists. So that's my form of dualism. Mind and matter employ entirely different processes, but they share the same substrate, so they can interact in both directions. How? I've no idea. But to us dualists, it's obvious that they can. Now I'll move on to the Evo part of my Evo-dualism. I start with 4 principles. 1. Only in creatures that have evolved do we find minds. For example, consciousness in us. So I'm not a panpsychist. Mind emerges only once life appears. Atoms on Mars don't have mental attributes. They're purely physical. 2. Now I come to an assertion, essential for my theory of everything, for which I can claim only the evidence of my senses. It may be hard for you to accept. Evolution is creative. For me, for single-celled microbes to evolve into giraffes and elephants and humans, nothing could be more creative. If that isn't creative, I don't know what the word can mean. What can make that hard to accept? If you've gone along with the physicalist theory of evolution that involves only physical processes, natural selection and genetic mutation, you may have made yourselves blind to anything that might challenge that theory, such as simply seeing how creative evolution has been. Purely physical processes are deterministic. They can't generate anything novel. Once I found novelty in how living creatures evolved, the modern synthesis fell apart. It couldn't account for anything novel like the evolution of mind. So what we dualists need is a different mechanism that can account for the evolution of mind. 3. I'm now going to pose 2 questions and suggest one solution for them both. One question is, what is it that drives evolution? What's the agent? Second, we don't make ourselves conscious. It develops in us while we're still children. Where does consciousness come from? My answer to both questions is the genome. Some background information about the genome. In us, it comes in the nucleus of each cell in our bodies as a few dozen long molecules, chromosomes. Joined together, they would stretch for about how tall we are, 6 foot. It's by far the most complex molecule we know of, much more than any other molecule in our bodies or our brains. Code for about 10,000 proteins takes up less than 2% of it. It must code for a vast amount of information. Yet each time a cell divides, its whole genome, all 6 foot of it, divides too. Moving on from cell to cell since life first began, down the generations, it stayed alive and growing to the colossal size it is today. So what is it that drives evolution? For want of any plausible alternatives, I've had to conclude it's been our genome that drives our evolution. Genomes are the agents of evolution. And what can we deduce from us evolving to become conscious? Our embryo, a single cell, draws on its genome to make all the trillions of cells making up our adult body. But along with that, we acquired the mental abilities it takes for us to become conscious. Those abilities had to have come written in code along a molecule, our genome. There's nothing else in the embryo, a single cell, from which it could have come. 4. What can that tell us? It says the genome must be able, to some extent, to engage with and transact in terms of mind. I'm going to shrink that down to saying genomes have minds. They had to evolve first. They had to evolve minds before they could know how to build intelligence, consciousness, and creativity into us. We can't do that for ourselves. So there's the first set of principles drawn from evolution. Minds appear only in creatures that evolve. Evolution is creative. The agent responsible for evolution is the genome. Genomes had to evolve minds first to be able to embed minds in us. That's the basic platform for my Evo-dualism. Nothing more than matter and the kinds of mental processes we experience operating in ourselves. Nothing supernatural, nothing contradicting science, merely a rearrangement of elements of reality we're already familiar with, extending our own mental processes to the genome, the agent responsible for our evolution and our individual development. There are some mysteries this platform can't help us with: how mind and matter interact, the nature of consciousness, how life originated, and anything supernatural. But it may help us account for much that's otherwise mysterious to us. Here are some examples. A mechanism of evolution that can account for mind. Species of living creatures originating by genomes thinking them up. What meaning is, where we get it, from our genome and culture. How meaning relates to what's real, physical. Our thoughts consisting of meanings and evolving into one another. Limits to mind imposed by it having evolved. And how humans are exceptional. I describe all this in more detail in books available at Amazon, in other videos in this channel, and in the website Evolution for the Humanities. Links in the comments. How does all this relate to intelligent design and the Discovery Institute? Not at all. Evo-dualism makes no allowance for anything supernatural or religious. It is purely rational. However, I have to admit it does employ some quite wild speculation to paper over some gaps. I look to researchers like Michael Levin of Tufts University to help bridge those gaps. I hope having a theory of everything based on mind will encourage others to consider working in this space. What motivates me is wanting to see abolished today's theory of evolution, the modern synthesis. It's pure physicalism. Its mechanism is purely physical. Clearly implied is something produced by a purely physical mechanism, that's us, will also be purely physical. This rules out dualism, rules out us having minds. For me, saying human beings are purely physical leads to fatalism and eventually to barbarism. I want the modern synthesis removed from the school science curriculum, and I invite other dualists to join the cause. What am I offering instead? It used to be called vitalism, introducing mind to help explain how living creatures work. The triumphs of physics early in the 20th century drove that underground. But modern genomics offers a new opportunity for making mind respectable again.